Welcome back. Today we're going to be using Photoshop Beta. Probably when you'll see this video, this may be out of date. There may be a newer version. And the image we're going to pick on is one of my grandmother. Here she is. Now this photo is a JPEG, which means there won't necessarily be a huge amount of color depth in it, but we'll do our very best to see what we can find. Starting with levels, I always like to go to the adjustments, look at levels. Now there's a lot of information in the whites and nothing in the blacks there. You can see it's almost nothing, and all the information is up the top. Now if I pull that little bottom in, or I pull that bottom up, you can see how that adjusts the contrast. Too much and we lose information at the bottom, and too much the other way and we lose information at the top. In the middle is the gamma, or the midpoint, and you can see I can pull that left and right and just get a nice pleasing range of contrast. Once I'm done with that, I generally like to crop the image. Now cropping, you can take just the original border of the picture and crop it in a little, but today I just thought I'd give a generative fill a try. So selecting a little marquee of that area there, and then using the generative fill down the bottom and giving it no text input, just letting it do its thing. It's going to try its best to generate her shoulder and a bit of the background, and the reason I wanted to do that is just to balance up the composition a tiny bit. There. Now also you can see here I have 3 choices for which one I like the most, and I settle on the middle one and collapse those two together. I've always make sure to save the original of an image before I do any of this. Now I'll just take the border off that side a touch. Okay. Now let's zoom in and have a good look. You can see there's dust, scratches, dots. Some of this is going to be hard to determine whether it's a freckle or actually a dust spot or a piece of dirt, but I'm going to use the heal tool and making sure it's on content aware, so that what it does is it's aware of all the other pixels surrounding and it samples those. Now you can see it's some of these vertical scratches are a little hard because you can do things like draw over something quickly and it mucks up a little bit, you know, how it sees an area of detail like that. And the eyes are particularly tricky, and you can see here I'm trying to repair it in a way that removes the line but also doesn't introduce noise or artifacts into the image. And in fact, sometimes content aware brush isn't good enough, and you're never going to lose that sense of a line, or you're going to damage the eye here. So you can see I'm trying and undoing and trying and undoing. Sometimes I go to the paintbrush and with a very low opacity I sample the colors around and just touch up some of those tones. So back to the content aware fill. See that there, I thought was a scratch, but it's actually a crease. So I had to undo that. And you get to a point where you've so zoomed in, some of the artifacting is actually from the JPEG. This picture was given to me. If this was my photograph, I would have scanned it at a higher resolution, saved it as a TIFF, but sometimes you have to work with what you're given. You can see I'm sort of making strokes on the hair in the direction of the hairs, because I think sometimes the correction tool actually works better working in a directional stroke. Hopefully my Alma's happy here. I'm taking off a few things which I think are spots that she might appreciate that I removed. But generally I'm trying to work out what's detail versus what's an artifact. And what's interesting is kind of like what Baumgartner says on his channel, you start removing the dots and the artifacts and you really start to see the portrait without that layer of noise on top. So what I'm trying to do is not make this a super duper clean portrait with a whole bunch of smoothing and whatnot. What I want to do is retain the integrity of it, but just remove the blemishes that the photographic process or years have introduced. So this skin's pretty simple to clean, but the hair gets a bit trickier, particularly with these lines cutting through. And you can kind of see here with too much correction on that line where the line was. The contrast's gone a bit, it's getting a bit grey and a bit mushy. So at this point I've come back and I'm sampling a few of those brighter colours, and I'm just seeing if I can paint the hairs back over the top slightly. Back to the paintbrush, very low opacity, maybe a little higher. Put a few of those darker lines in. You can see slowly on we're starting to remove that sense of a line. It's a difficult line to tread between how much you paint versus how much you leave, and when does a photograph cease being historical and accurate and start becoming a piece of art. And for this image I'm more just wanting a clean picture of my grandmother rather than it being any kind of historical document. So every hair and every little dot and blemish, I don't mind if it's slightly different. I care about her eyes and her face, but some of this other stuff, you know, if it's slightly different, I don't mind. And I've always saved the original separately. I never ever save over the original. Just reintroducing a little depth in those eye creases that got washed away a little bit by the spot healing tool. I think the worst thing about this kind of work is if you watch this back, or I'm sure you'll be watching this and you'll see that I've missed something or maybe taken something away I shouldn't have. And yeah, it's a hard one because where do you stop? Again, some of these might be skin blemishes, but I'm doing my best. Here's an interesting little artifact right over the hair. You can see it's done a pretty good job, but I'll get back in there and just add a couple of those hairs back just so that that little horseshoe shape is truly gone. I also find that sometimes removing dots up close is good. I mean, you get a lot of it done, but then you zoom out wider and you see larger dots or more subtle patches of tone, of damage. Like there's one right in the nape of her neck there, which I don't realise until much later. But some of these bigger, whiter scratches on the background, sometimes it's nice to zoom out and work wide and then zoom in and work on the detail. Again, not removing absolutely everything, but most of it. And I think we're getting pretty close. Alright, so looking back at this is shadows and highlights, and see when you drag this up, it takes the top end of the image down, and you can just sort of see if there's any more detail to be had. Like she's quite blown out on her screen right shoulder, so I was just seeing if there was any more weave in the fabric or anything to be had. I'm going to save this now, just as a JPEG. So I won't save over the original. I'll generally put an underscore and say cleaned or corrected, something like that. Now this is the neural filters, and this photo restoration one's not bad. It does have a enhancement. It also has a face detection algorithm, and you can see if I turn it on and off with the face selection on, it's quite aggressive. This one actually makes her look more like a charcoal illustration than a photograph, so I tend to be very careful with the face. Also, what it does is it sharpens up the face but nothing else, and you tend to get a sharp face on a blurry photograph. Also here you can see JPEG artifacting, because this was a JPEG. JPEG puts a whole bunch of faint little squares and cubes where it's compressed the image, and I tend to like to run that higher than anything else if it was originally a JPEG. So just playing with the sliders to get something I like. You can toggle between the original and the new, and you can see it's cleaned up a fair bit. But what I will always do is, you can see down the bottom of that menu it says current layer. Always be careful there, always be careful to say put on a new layer. When you hit OK, you'll see in Photoshop it's done that correction to a new layer, and you can actually come in and toggle that on or off, actually mix it back a little if you feel like it's too aggressive, or mask it and just use small areas of that correction. In this case I'm quite happy with it. See, there's me playing with a bit of opacity, just seeing if I like it, and I do, I think. Save that. Great. Now down there is revert, F12, and it's always nice to just hit that occasionally and see where you've been, and then undo. So what that does is reverts back to the file when you first loaded it. Sometimes it's great to just reset and see how far you've come. One last little thing I'll play with is this, Colorize. Now Colorize is a neural filter. It does a first pass guess. It's pretty good. It's pretty good at detecting what's what, but what I will do is adjust that manually. So you can either put little push pins in the preview window on the right, or you can do what I do, which is create a separate layer which only extracts that new color information and puts it in a layer on top, and then sets that layer to color. You can see the word color there. Now if I go to normal, it would just be colored pixels, but down on the color setting, it just basically kind of screens the color over the top of the black and white image. Now I'm going to use the eyedropper to select and paint areas, but what you want to do is make sure that you are not set to all layers, because it'll select the darkness and the lightness of the black and white image as well as the color, and all I want to do is pick those color pixels. So I keep it on current layer. So now when I'm selecting color, it's just the color on that top layer. Now with all that set up, I can get the paintbrush going and get in there and start zooming. See, it's given her too much lipstick on her, well, the side of her lip there, so I'd like to paint some of that away. And I quite often move between using low opacity and high opacity on this stuff, trying to drive up the opacity a bit harder because it was a bit soft. So I'm just selecting the skin tone from different areas around and trying different things. And you can see her eyelids have gotten quite grey or purpley, so I'm just going to try and freshen those up a little by selecting the colour of her cheek. And I found that if you're too precise, if you really don't let a little bit of colour bleed onto the eyeballs or vice versa, it gets a little cut out looking and a bit sort of manually coloured. So I like to sort of make it a little fuzzy. You can kind of see there's yellow on her shoulder there, so I'll just put a little blue into that. It's also a little yellow down the bottom right here. A bit more opacity. Got a little bit too carried away and put a bit of blue on her neck, so fix that up. And generally you just sort of look around and see what looks right or wrong. You can see her ear is quite grey blue, so I'll put some colour there. But then that fine yellow excuse me, of her hair has gotten lost, so clean that up a bit. A little less lipstick. Now I'm adding a new layer here and setting that to colour because I want to explore with the idea of pumping up the blue in her eyeballs just a little bit, but I don't want to destroy the colours that were underneath. So another layer set on top and set to colour will override the layer below, so I can go too far and then wind it back with opacity from nothing and just creep that blue in a little bit. So that feels pretty good, so I'll collapse that down and then set that colour layer back to colour. Now zooming out wide, you can see there's a fair bit of yellow in the top of the frame, so I'm just going to flatten out that vignette of colour behind her, make it a bit more uniformly blue. So I'll save this out. Underscore colour. I like to save all three because, I mean, the colour's just, it's okay, but it's not authentic, and some people may not like it. So I like to just save it out as its own file. And there you go. So if I put that there and then I open up the original, yeah, I think it's quite improved. Great. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you learned something. Again, see, there's me fixing that last little bit down by her neck. But yeah, it's not a perfect science. It's just a bit of fun at this stage, and just something I'm doing with my family photographs, just to have them in a little nicer state than how I found them.